Everything is personal right here. Everything is personal right here.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another episode of Everything is Personal. Today, we have a special guest with us, a very busy person, so I'm super grateful that Mr. Kyle Sherman, CEO of Flowhub, took some time out of his busy schedule and gave us some of his time. So thanks, man. Thanks for being on.
Thanks for having me on, man. I'm excited to be here with you today.
All right. So I listened to a bunch of your content, your podcasts and interviews you're on. We were just talking about one prior to this, but I'm not sure. There was only one that was really talking about where did you grow up and all that stuff. So I want to kind of dig into a little bit of your background. You're from Chicago originally. Is that the case?
I am. Yeah, I was born and raised in Chicago in second grade, moved to the northwest suburbs. And that's really where I grew up. Yeah.
So are you a Chicago sports fan as well?
You know, I didn't grow up watching sports. I was a guy who didn't go out and play sports. I spent all my time on a computer, actually, which ended up clearly paid off.
Exactly. I was going to say.
But yeah,
that's a public service announcement for everybody in Chicago or in Philly. I'm originally from Philly, but I live in LA. But when the city is all about sports, sometimes the kid that's in his room on the computer, maybe there's another direction you can go into, right?
Exactly. I mean, look, I played soccer, I think, when I was like a very small child, when it's not actually a sport, right? But that was about it. And I really, I think, if I recall the stories from my mom correctly, I was the kid who would like be picking the dandelions out by the, by the goalie or whatever, not really paying attention. It's funny now, Len, I actually have a lot more respect for sports and coaching in particular. I don't know if you've seen this series on Netflix called The Playbook.
Yeah.
But I'm loving these sports documentaries and really understanding how teams perform better. You can have these great players, right? But if you don't have a great coach, how do you stitch the team together to actually perform well? So I actually have a huge respect for sports, but I didn't grow up playing any.
Yeah, you hit the thing about coaching is so interesting to me because I think the word coach gets tossed around all over the place. We're like, I'm a productivity coach. I'm this coach, Okay, great. That's fine. And by the way, I was a coach. I was an ADD coach for executives for a while. So I'm putting myself into this category too. But I think there's something to be said about like the John Woodens and all these. And I was listening to this one, I think Darren Hardy wrote this book and he was talking about this commonality that a Lance Armstrong or an Arnold Schwarzenegger had. And it's about how they show up when they can't do anymore. Like it's burning, their body's burning. And the special thing that a coach, somebody in your ear can tell you, you can push a little bit more. And it's that a little bit more, one or two more reps, one or two more sets that makes like 80% of the difference. So it really sets people apart. And sometimes you need that kind of push and a coaching, but real coaching to get you over the hump. And people know how to do that well. Have been, successful like the people I just mentioned now. So you grew up in Chicago and then you moved to the suburbs. Do you have any brothers or sisters?
I have a little brother. He's an expat. So he left the US many years ago. I think he's been living in Sweden now for probably over a decade. He met his now wife, who was coming to the US every summer in high school. So they've been together for a very long time. But yeah, they have two kids. They're out in Stockholm, Sweden. He works there. He speaks the language. We're both Irish citizens. So we actually also we're dual citizens with the United States. So we have an Irish passport. So it allowed him to, get access into the EU without having to go through some onerous process, right? So he actually has he's like the Jason Bourne, right? Of like real life, right? He's got 3 passports and he's quite the worldly guy. Got his master's out there and is phenomenally successful working out in Sweden. But so otherwise it's just me here in the States.
So what was the age difference?
Stayed behind.
What was the age difference between you guys?
We were 2 years apart.
Okay, so did you grow up pretty close?
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, we were real buddies growing up. I'm sure we had our our fights. I don't recall those times, but it was a really fun childhood. We did a lot of exploring. We grew up in an area outside of Chicago with quite a bit of land. Like our particular property was probably about an acre and a half or so that we grew up on. Which was like fairly unusual for a childhood. I realized a lot of people grew up in cities and stuff. So we got to really every property in our neighborhood was like that. So you could like roam around in trees and so we'd have a lot of fun. As we got older, we'd play paintball and we were friends with so many kids in our neighborhood. So it was like a lot of fun just playing outside. And so when I wasn't on a computer, I was outside playing paintball with my little brother and our crazy friends in the neighborhood. But it was a phenomenal childhood, a lot of creativity. We could our parents let us, it was so safe in the area. We could just kind of roam around. So realized grew up very privileged in that way.
Yeah, I think I have a daughter who's going to be 18 in January, and the way that they hang out with their friends is not even close to the way I hung out with my friends. Like I was a latchkey kid, so you just go, you come home from school by yourself, you go out with your friends, you take the bike, and you come home when the light comes on in the neighborhood. Nobody cares if it's safe or not. Just come home.
Exactly. You'd be out all day long in the summer, right? You'd just be roaming around doing your thing as a kid. And there's something so magical about that. And on top of that, my brother and I were actually homeschooled for about 6 years, I want to say. So for me, it was about end of fourth grade until midway through high school. And that was a really great experience too, right? So it was just the freedom to explore and learn in the way that was right for me as a person, and same with my brother. So we had a lot of freedom growing up. And I think that was really successful for us. And now we homeschool our two oldest daughters, and so we're kind of passing along that level of like openness to learning in a different way.
Yeah. I mean, schooling, my daughter's been to private school for most of her life, so we're privileged also to have that. But I went to public school, which was ridiculous. I was like, it's survival every single day. You go to school. Like, I don't think parents understand yes, you learn or you don't learn, but I went to a very violent school. So you're always watching somebody's going to do something to you and vice versa. So there was a lot of violence in that. And I don't think people that get that in the public school system. And then you moved to LA, right?
I did. So I graduated high school early. I was 17 and picked up and left right away to move out to California. It was interesting, actually. I really wanted to get into the entertainment business. I thought that industry seemed really interesting to me, the creativity, the business side of things. And so I actually worked my way, I kind of weaseled my way into an internship on a movie called Stranger Than Fiction.
Matt, I was going to ask you that. You just jumped ahead. I was like, I wouldn't have surprised Kyle with my research on his IMDb profile.
Oh my gosh. And that was a fun experience, but that really is what actually led me to LA. So I did this film, turned 18 on the set. It was just this phenomenal experience, working, alongside this producer and director. And the producer really took me under a wing, Lindsay Doran. She was so nice. I think I was super annoying as a young kid. I was asking too many questions when we were supposed to be quiet on set, but it was really, they really, the crew and the team was so open. They like really taught me. And the gentleman I was working for on set, we were running what's called Video Village, where the director, producers, actors sit and watch takes, and you sit behind the scenes. So I was in charge of all the technology, getting it all set up, the microwave antennas and stuff. And I'm just like this 17-year-old punk that probably shouldn't have been there. Trying to understand this business and having really no fear, I guess, back then of communicating with some of these, now in retrospect, like very famous people and very successful people in the business. I really wanted to go be out in LA. And so that ultimately that project is what led me out to LA. And I actually never ended up going to college. I ended up like really exploring, the entertainment business. And that led me on all sorts of crazy adventures, which was really quite a lot of fun. And actually, it's funny. I like in a very, like some way, sometime in LA, I started, I think it was 2008, I started a podcast before podcasting was a thing, with a roommate of mine who was on a television show called Weeds. That was on Showtime at the time. He played a character, Silas Botwin, dear friend of mine. And so we started this podcast, and we were like top iTunes for a long time. But back then, I think it was probably only maybe a couple million listeners on iTunes back then. But it was like, it was early days of podcasting. So there's some fun experiences out there in LA, exploring technologies and in the business and all those things. So
for sure. Did you get to hang out with Will Ferrell at all?
Oh, of course. Yeah, all the actors. I'll never forget Emma Thompson was, phenomenally talented actress, was just the sweetest human being. And I'll never forget some of the interactions we had over, we all worked together for many months, and these sets are so fun because, these, unlike software that kind of keeps going and going and going, right? You can keep maturing the platform and adding new things. A movie is A to Z, like you have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that's it, right? And then it's over. It's kind of like summer camp. So you get super close to people. And it's a tight group. It's not like a giant group doing these bigger films. So yeah, I mean, just very fond memories of being around, around all these really talented people, not just the actors, right? But behind the scenes talent as well. It was really cool. And to really being an intern working the video village, you are in the action. You get to see every take. You're with the producers, the directors, like the casting folks. You're with the actors. You're not off to the side locking down a street as a production assistant. You're in the action, and that was just to really open my eyes to like what you could do creatively with marketing and films, and and how great teams run. It was so cool to see how a director and the producers would run, this crew of 150 people. Flawlessly, you'd have to deal with last minute. The entertainment business, everything's last minute. It's Len. It's like you think you're onto something, and then like the location doesn't work out the same way, or it's raining suddenly, and you don't have. So everything's like a scramble. So you have to be tight as a team. You can't perform well under those types of stressful conditions. And so that was really fundamental for me to learn how great teams work together. To see Mark Forrester and Lindsay Doran run the show there.
Such a great example, and I had different experiences in the movie. So very similar background to you. And I moved from Philly to LA. My ex-wife was an actress, and I also was an executive producer in 2 films, but independent movies, meaning that I gave money, invested in these films. But the productions that I was involved with did not run like that at all. They were all over the place. The director was yelling at people. It was not a well-organized team. So one a great example. And they ran out of money. And the one production, I actually had to go and get companies product placement so they can get other money. So it was this one movie, which was filmed in Serbia, and it was in the psychologist's office. It was horror film. But we have to get a vodka company to sponsor. So for some reason, the psychologist has a bottle of vodka on his table, which normally, why would he be drinking vodka? But it doesn't matter. It gave him another 50 grand or whatever it is to help him complete some scenes. So yeah, completely different experience. But also, brought me out to LA and also got me in the cannabis business. So, transitioning to cannabis, correct me if I'm wrong, but you had some physical conditions, or right, and then you were recommending cannabis for those physical conditions, or was it something like that?
Yeah, actually, so it's a bit more complex than that. Yeah, it's a bit more complex. So in LA, as I mean, you're out there as a young guy, right? It was that was my so much learning, like social learning, and things that typically I think a lot of folks get in college. I didn't go, right, so like I'm learning how to do things out there, and it was a lot of fun, right? Produced a bunch of movies, and like I was 20 years old. I did one for Lionsgate and what was Mel Gibson's Icon Productions. We did we ended up selling that one to Sci-Fi, but it was a lot of fun. We had like this great time, but through those experiences, it's very lonely, right? And people go to LA typically for self-motivated purposes, right? They're not going there selflessly. They're going there to kind of make themselves. And so you end up in a place where socially people are out for themselves. Yeah. And that was really isolating for me. And I remember I ended up dating this woman out there, and we had a great relationship, and we had broke up, and I was in my early 20s, right? I got really depressed from that. And one of my friends said, "Hey, you got to try antidepressants." I had a buddy who did that, so I ended up going to see this doctor, first appointment. Oh, here you go. Here's this, here's that. Right. And I'm like, great. I ended up taking SSRIs and, the anti-anxiety benzodiazepines. And these are, at the time I had no idea what I was getting myself into, right? They don't tell you, hey, just by the way, it's going to be really hard wean yourself off this stuff.
Yeah.
And so after about a year and a half, my personality just felt different. I lost my entrepreneurial drive, this excitement and just drive to get things done. And that freaked me out. And I think I guess I just had enough self-awareness maybe to go, hey, I want to get off these particular substances. They're not serving me. And so I went to just stop taking these medicines, and I realized that wasn't a good idea. I had created a lot of physical pain for me, Len. I was having like brain zaps in my head, and they were flowing down my spine, just real strong physical pains. And turns out you really can't just stop taking these medications. You have to titrate them down. So I went to another doctor anyway, and I said, hey, I want to get off this stuff. But he said, no, you're not going to get off this stuff. You're on this for life. We can switch up your medications. I said, what? No one told me that. I thought I was just going to feel bad. I wanted to just not be depressed for a while, right? And it turns out, like, this is, I often say, like, I learned that prescriptions are subscriptions. It's a phenomenal recurring revenue business for big pharma, right? You get people on these drugs and you kind of like, yeah, sorry, you're on them forever. So, look, I ended up going through this experience, researching online. I ended up on forums, found out other people were having similar issues trying to get off these drugs. And I ended up seeing, do you remember the Sanjay Gupta special, Weed, on CNN?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, the Charlotte's Web. It actually motivated my parents, because my parents ended up kicking me out of the house for weed. When they saw the documentary, they're like, oh, wait, maybe there is something medical about this. So they listened to Dr. Gupta. Yeah, I remember exactly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was it. It was, look, I already had my weed card and, my permission slip from the green doctor from Venice Beach, so I was using cannabis on and off, but I never really, I don't know, I just never really took it that seriously. And I never really thought about it. Fast forward to this, watching this documentary, I went, oh, wow, this is a medicine. I need to go find a strain high in CBD. So I went, of course, I go on this hunt to go find. I used a very rudimentary early version of Weed Maps back then. I was like very early, right? I think Justin had just started the company a few years prior, and I ended up finding a strain called Harlequin. And I remember going in and getting Harlequin. I bought a PAX vaporizer. I used that, and I used it 3 times a day, and I weaned myself off these medications using Harlequin, a phenomenal strain. It's like 15% CBD, 5% THC, sativa, leaning, and so it doesn't really put you down. And my body got used to it, right? But it would take away those brain zaps, all that physical pain, and it was such an eye-opening experience as an entrepreneur, because I'm going, like, I fell in love with something for the first time that wasn't like I was forcing it. It was like this relationship developed with this plant, and led me into this rabbit hole of learning about the racist roots of the drug war, and really, where this industry was really coming from, and that this was just a plant. It was just a flower and has all this medicinal value, but it was only in recent years, 75 years of prohibition, that that was vilified so heavily. It led me down this rabbit hole of propaganda and government, and it was like this really eye-opening experience on so many levels. It really helped me grow up. And as an entrepreneur, I was like, look, I want to figure out how to make safe cannabis products accessible to every adult on planet Earth. This is ridiculous. People are going to prison. This is what? Right? How could this possibly be? I just was saved by this thing. So I went back on the forums, right? And I was telling all these people that I had been reading about, hey, you got to try cannabis. This worked for me. It will work for you. And it turns out it worked for other people. And I thought, well, you know what? This is maybe how I leave my mark on the world. And maybe we can change how society looks at these, these substances. And that really was the beginning of Flowhub, and ended up in early 2014, picking up and moving to Colorado with my wife, and we were pregnant. We found out we were pregnant, and our daughter's due date was 4/20, and we were like, the universe is telling us we're on the right track. You can't make this up. Yeah. So anyway, that's how I got into the industry. It was really like going to LA and going through this experience and growing up there, and like really becoming an adult. It was just a really kind of, like, I look back on it, it was an awesome ride. But I'm grateful to be where I am now, so.
Yeah. So much similarities. I was diagnosed with ADD when I was in my teens, put on SSRIs, discovered cannabis. Then I actually did some work for a drug rehab facility that we were doing a soft landing for opioid addicts with phytocannabinoids. Wade Laughter was the guy that actually brought Harlequin to the States from Vietnam. I got to meet him up in the Emerald Triangle. He brought the seeds back with him. So that's a phenomenal cultivar. Exactly. Really hard to find these days, real medicinal, cannabis, because everybody's moving towards high THC products. But that one, fully expressed, great terpene profile. You're absolutely correct. And the one,
you're real piney. I think what I loved about it is just so piney. It smelled like almost pine needles.
A lot of piney in there. But one of the reasons why we started the company, my company, Endocanna Health, is for that personalized experience using genetics. So we started discovering that two people can take the same cultivar and have completely different experience. And also the drug interaction. We started getting a lot of people who are getting off their SSRIs. Benzos, by the way, are the worst thing to get off of. When we were in the rehab, they were saying they will get the people off of opioids prior to trying to get them off benzos. They're the worst to get off of, because your brain gets used to these neurochemicals, and your brain is lazy, wants to conserve energy. So it says, I'm no longer going to produce those neurochemicals because you found some other substance to do it. So let's rely on that. And when you don't get it, your brain starts sending signals throughout your body saying, no, give me more of that. And that's where you're feeling inflammation, pain, all these different things. The withdrawals are pretty bad from those things. But
they're horrible. They'll kill you. The withdrawals will kill you. I mean, look, opiates themselves will not kill you. The withdrawals won't kill you. It's 3 days of hell, right? That's the truth. Opiate withdrawals, look, opiates themselves are dangerous, right? They will stop you from breathing. But in small amounts, it's not actually that dangerous of a substance. It's another vilified substance, and especially in its full plant form, right, which comes from opium, right? It's actually like a fairly safe substance, highly addictive, but fairly safe, right? You can get dependent on them quickly. However, the withdrawals aren't actually that bad, right? It's a flu-like symptoms for 3 days. Benzos, to your point, it could be a year-long battle from hell where you have the most. I did it. I've been through it. It's awful. And it's actually very similar to alcohol. Benzodiazepines can be used for alcohol withdrawals, right? And as we know, that will kill you too. And it's because of your GABA and the stress it puts on your body. To your point, some of these substances are incredibly valuable, but also incredibly toxic. And so it's benzos have their place, right? But I mean, they're meant for very short-term use and short-term. And I was prescribed them daily.
Yeah, well, I love what you just said, the subscription model, because that's our model in the United States is just that. I mean, you created a system that actually creates a lifelong subscription. And that's why the pharmaceutical industry, 2008, when all the other, I guess, industries were going down, the pharmaceutical industry was doing fairly well, because whether you're depressed or you're anxious, there's a pill for it. And by the way, if you have withdrawals or you have some side effects, there's a pill for that as well. So it's a really nice subscription model for them. So you moved to Colorado.
Half the time, just real quick, half the time, these don't even work. I mean, if you look at the efficacy of an SSRI, it is minimal. It's like de minimis. The efficacy of an SSRI is like sub 17%, right? And that's really bad. But look at how often they prescribe it like candy, right? So it's just look, it works for some people, right? There's some subset of the population that does help, right? I don't want to minimize the value of some of these substances, but we overprescribe them. I mean, what's important in life, right? This is where psychedelics are incredible. We're seeing the work MAPS is doing with MDMA. You see, what's happening with psilocybin, the research, that we've seen on LSD coming from the 50s and 60s, right? These substances help you work through problems. And so unlike a subscription model, you take them one time, a handful of times, in the right environment, the right setting, you can work through the pain that's causing the root cause of the depression, and then you can get rid of it and you can live a normal life. We're as animals, we're not meant to be, on prescriptions forever. It just is not that's just not right. Now there's certain medicines, right? Of course, people that need insulin and other things these are life-changing, life-saving things that absolutely are incredible pieces of modern technology and modern medicine. But it's right. I think the way we do it in the US is it's so broken. And,
well, you're speaking my language, man, because, one of the things we do is we look at treatment-resistant depression, and you can see that over 30% of the population has treatment-resistant depression. they'll still be prescribed SSRIs. It'll never work for them, but they'll get all the side effects from the SSRIs too. And the one thing I was saying, that people contact us trying to get off their SSRIs, and they're taking phytocannabinoids with their SSRIs. Well, guess what? There's an interaction between phytocannabinoids and SSRIs. You shouldn't be taking them together in the first place. So people get themselves in all kinds of trouble by not understanding. And one of the issues is, not having a regulated industry. The cannabis industry. Yes, we have some regulation here and there in the States. And I think I saw one of the interviews you were saying, it's like we live in 50 different countries. And I think people don't understand. It's exactly what I've always said. You go, we even speak different languages in different parts of the country. And you can't compare people in Colorado to people in Alabama, or vice versa. So it lends to a lot of different complexities. And not having a standard that we can all strive to reach, that's causing a lot of issues in the industry as well. So hopefully the work that you guys are doing will help to be able to get the government to start looking at, there is a way that we can do this safely, effectively. We can track everything that we're doing, and all the way through the entire flow. So anyway, I'm stepping ahead of myself because I'm fascinated by what you guys are doing, because I think it's a huge value add to the entire industry. But how did you actually come up with this model? I know you were working at other companies in the cannabis industry. What was the problem you were seeing and trying to solve?
Yeah, well, I think the first step, right, is you got to identify the problem. And so for me, we moved out to Colorado. And, I did all this research prior to coming to Colorado. It was funny, the first day, I mean, there's just all so much, serendipity, basically. I pull up with my very pregnant wife in downtown Denver. I'd never been to Colorado, really. I never really thought about Colorado all that much, but here we are. Get out of the car in downtown Denver to take a look around. We had rented a small apartment for, I think it was like a 2-month temporary lease. And sure enough, I look up and I'd recognize this guy walking up the street. Happens to be Trip Kieber, and at the time he was the founder and CEO of Dixie Elixirs, a big edibles brand. They were doing these drinks, and he was all over CNBC at the time, and really one of the early drivers of the adult use industry and medical industry in Colorado. So I ran up to him and I said, "Hey man, look." He said, "Whoa, who are you? How do you know who I am?" And I said, "Trip, I've seen your interviews. I'll literally come work for you. I want to learn the business." And we became good friends, and I ended up doing some consulting work for them on the marketing side and some social marketing for them. And just really, I spent a lot of time talking to Trip, and he'd take me through the Dixie Elixirs. I don't call it a factory, the warehouse, right, where they were produced. Their MIPS facility, and I just learned a lot there. Right, he taught me a lot about the space, and that led me. I called Justin at Weed Maps, or sent him an email or something. I said, "Hey, I'd love to work with you guys. I've used your product in California about here." He's like, "Great, cool." And so I ended up doing some consulting for Weed Maps at the time, and then ultimately met a gentleman named Matt Berger, and he was the creator of a really old school strain, Bubba Kush, pre-98 Bubba, as it's now known, if you could still find the F1 genetics. But Matt owned a dispensary, MIPS facility where we manufactured vape pens, and a grow facility. And I said, "Hey, I'd love to come work for you for free." And he said, "Oh, I'll pay you hourly." And I ended up running compliance for them. And it was there that I really started to wrap my head around. This was mid 2014. I started to wrap my head around what it meant to be a vertical supply chain in this space, what it meant to run a dispensary. And running compliance, I was working with this little program called MITS at the time. It's now called Metric. There was no APIs. So we had a team of people scanning in items and reporting to the state manually. And I ended up writing these macros to do that automatically. So I bought a Bluetooth scanner, kicked it to my iPhone. I basically would scan items into this little applet, and I'd use that to generate these macros on the system, on the PC, to auto fill in information. It wasn't always the most accurate, because you're using macros in a web interface. But the idea was I started to prove out what ultimately became our NUG device, this handheld device that you could scan in tags and do things like that. But originally this idea was kind of we're going to build, grow, manufacturing, and retail tracking software for dispensaries, grow facilities, and manufacturing facilities. And so I started lobbying the Department of Revenue linked up with a bunch of retailers that are now some of the largest retailers in Colorado, but back then, right, 1-2 locations, and really just started to like get my hands super dirty. Really understood the problem set. Okay, the big problem, the reason these retailers can't scale is they don't have software to help them scale. They can't report data automatically. So I had to go lobby the state and say, hey, you need to open up APIs to your state system, and that allows two systems to talk to each other, right? I don't want to report manually anymore. We can report automatically. And I showed them this prototype Nug device. Anyway, by early 2015, I officially founded Flowhub, and the name came from Workflow Hub or Flower Hub. It's the center of your supply chain. Ultimately evolved that by 2016 into retail only, got first endpoints to metric, launched door-to-door sales around Colorado with my wife. And we turned it into the being one of the leading companies on the tech side of the industry today. And we power retailers across the United States, have a fairly decent market share, I guess, at this point. But we come from the roots of the first state in adult use in this industry, and that's been really formative, I think, for our culture as an organization, because we're not jumping in here to make a bunch of money, and we didn't get into this space to get in and get out, and we really building with longevity and for the right reasons. And one of our values as companies, we love cannabis at Flowhub. You don't have to smoke it every day, you don't have to use it every day, but we love cannabis. We love this plant, what it means, and we love. I think we're pretty radical at Flowhub. We look at a future where safe cannabis products are going to be accessible to every adult on planet Earth. How do we do that, right? How can we be a part of that? And I feel like we're pretty radical in that none of us agree with how the government, what the government's done with the war on drugs, and we want to stop that. For me personally, it's a lot more than just cannabis. I want to see all drugs available to all medicines available to humans in some regulated fashion, some safe fashion. You see what's happening. Even this is radical, right? But I think opiates need to be legal. I think full spectrum opium needs to be available to people if they so desire to use it. And it's a shame that again, it's another drug war. Granted, like doctors shouldn't have been pushing it the way they were. It was marketed poorly. But these are, they're just taking alkaloids from a plant essentially and giving you the whiskey of opiates. This really strong singular, it's akin to taking THC, stripping away every terpene, everything else. You just have a pure THC, product. That is a very uncomfortable experience. And that's really what modern pharmaceutical opiates are like. And so, look, like these drugs are only, they're dangerous because people aren't educated about them.
Yeah.
And they're not regulated properly. So the reason people die for opiate overdoses tend to be because they're mixing them with other substances, and they're usually tainted with fentanyl coming in from outside the country. And these are unregulated substances. And it's just not fair to consumers who are going to take these drugs anyway. I look at models like Portugal or Switzerland where they've done a really good job managing. Right, they've got safe distribution sites, and people that are going to use these medicines are going to use them. That's just the reality of the situation. The law is not going to change it, and it's important to educate people. So anyway, I digress a bit, but it's
no. You're on it.
Radical view on these medicines.
I don't think it's radical at all. I think we're aligned on that vision too, and you hit the nail on the head as well by talking about these isolated molecules. I mean, the pharma industry tried during the AIDS epidemic to synthesize and create Marinol and some of these other products. The same thing. They didn't have the same effect, because you're isolating molecules, synthesizing and creating it. They don't understand the plant has over 400 different components, and it's how synergistically the plant works together with your body. And the same thing with all these other. I don't think people understand drugs in general, how they work. Like, I had this conversation with somebody about cocaine, and I said, there's nothing wrong with cocaine, because what happens in your body is if you consume cocaine, it binds to your receptor, your dopamine receptor, and it squirts 100 times more dopamine than you normally would. You would normally secrete by yourself, unless you were doing, something that secretes dopamine, and then it blocks the reuptake of that dopamine. So you have all this dopamine that's there, right? And then the biggest challenge with that is then when it does disappear, your brain's like, wait a second, I don't have to create this. I like this. Give me more of that. So there is a way to be able to balance it out. But if we have a receptor site for it and there's a safe way to use it, you're just secreting your own neurochemistry. And that's what we're really feeling. It's not the drug, it's our neurochemistry. I think it's a great example.
Right, you're affecting your neurochemistry. And it's amazing. Like, we should be able to change our perception. We should be able to experience these things.
100%.
It's part of the human experience. And, I've read a lot of books on opium, and it's amazing the history there, right? I mean, this is the full plant spectrum of the poppies that produce, these chemicals. It's incredible, like, what this drug can do. And the only reason it's illegal, like, again, you go back to the racist roots. Why is opium illegal? It's because of Chinese immigration. Yes. Why is marijuana illegal? Because of the Mexicans.
Yes.
Why, why is cocaine illegal? Because Black people used it. Why? Come on.
You're right.
The reason these are illegal and vilified is because of race, and that is ridiculous. That is such a shame. And it's really only the last 100 years or so that this has been kind of baked in globally into the psyche. Now, not every country, not every culture is the same, right? There's still these substances that people are open to in other countries, like at ayahuasca in Peru, right? But it is disgusting what we've done as humans across all these countries, because these are medicines that really have amazing potential, and we don't even study them in that full potential, right? Again, we're studying isolates these are full plants. There's real value in the full plant spectrum products, and it's such a shame. And then to look at how many communities have been destroyed by the drug war simply because of race. It's just ridiculous. And I say this as a privileged person sitting here talking to you today. And there's people sitting in jail right now who've been caught with a joint and they're still in there. And it's fucking ridiculous, and it's got to end. And that's part of my MO in life, right? This awakening of going through this process personally. I want to see the world that looks a bit different, a little more open-minded. Frankly, I think a lot of people though like control, and they like being told. You go through, going back to the school system real quick. You go through such a structured thing in life growing up, right? As a society, you're told these things. This is how you live. This is how you do things. This is what you do. You work until you're 65, then you retire, and then, right? That there's generations of people now that have been basically, there's this kind of culture baked in their psyche of control, and it's a shame because it minimizes creativity, entrepreneurial drive, new ideas, discovery. And so, all these things, I want to see a more open society. And this is why we homeschool our kids, right? It's why we believe in a more, anyway, I digress, but I could go on for hours with you.
Yeah, we should definitely talk about that, because you and I wrote a whole book about this, by the way. So I used to be the president of the Cannabis Action Network, fought for legalization, all that stuff, but I don't want to take time away from you to talk about it, but we are completely aligned, and there is a way to be able to do this and do it through science. And one of the major reasons why we're looking at these isolates, because the system, the FDA system of clinical trials, they don't know how to do it any other way. They all, you look at Epidiolex. Okay, like there's one product went through, but it's another molecule. Even two molecules in Sativax really was complex for them. So looking at something like that is going to be a big challenge. But I want to make sure that for the time that we have, I want to ask you about Maui and about what you're doing with Flowhub and what is Maui?
Flowhub Maui. Oh man, so when I started the company, Len, there was one state, one example, and we had to make a lot of guesses back in 2014, 2015 about what the future of the industry would look like. Look, the bet back then was, we're going to bring this to the masses. More states are going to open up and legalize for adult use, and they're going to copy the Colorado model. They're going to have, MITS or metric now as it's known, and it's going to look the same. Like, why not? Every state's going to copy this model. It works. Look at it, And we couldn't have been more wrong in many ways. Right? So we made some good guesses, right? But frankly, we had to do so much work entering new markets. Oregon legalizes, you go to Alaska, Michigan, right? Over all these years. And because of all the early guesses we made in the platform, we got some things wrong. And, the data structure and these other things. And so we really had to take a step back a couple of years ago and go, okay, so we got this far. How do we bridge now the next 10 years? How do we make sure that we can take our partners, our customers to the next level? And how can we make sure we're responding to the needs of our retailers? Because they're on the front lines. They're doing the real hard work. They're the ones who are providing the medicine to the consumer and giving that experience. So if we can help make their lives easier with technology, then even easier than we had already had, then we can help continue to see this vision, which is making safe cannabis products accessible to every adult on planet Earth, right? So Flowhub Maui really is this idea that it's a new product. It's this idea that look, we're gonna start over. We're gonna build from scratch. It's ridiculous. Everyone says don't do this, right? This is it's actually a lot of people say this is the dumbest thing you could do as a founder is go and actually rebuild something. They'll always say take one thing at a time and change it. I wanted to be a bit more radical, as you probably figured out I am at this point. And I said, let's just rebuild the damn thing. I don't want to take things off a chunk at a time. There are things we could do fundamentally from the most basic level 10x better. And by rebuilding, we'll never be able to move fast enough in this industry to keep up with the ever-changing regulatory schema that's happening across the states. And for the listeners who don't know, Len mentioned this earlier, right? We live in a world where, in the United States specifically, where every state acts like its own country. These are you can't ship items from California to Oregon and Oregon to Maine and Maine to right. You have to grow, manufacture, and sell the cannabis in the single market. And so every state goes I'll do it better than the last one. No biggie. We're going to change a bunch of stuff. We're going to tax THC this way, and we're going to do this and that, and we're going to create this crazy transparent supply chain that, I always say we track, I think you heard this in my Fox Business interview, we track cannabis better than we track uranium at this point in the United States, I think. So it really is true. This industry, for a flower, it's just ridiculous, right? And it's a very safe substance. You think you can just sell the damn thing on a shelf. No, you got to go through this. So anyway, Flowhub Maui is a labor of love for the team, and it's now launched in 5 states on the East Coast. We officially announced September 20th of this year, and it's 20 times faster than Flowhub Classic. It has a ton of new features, and it's named after the legendary strain Maui Wowie, one of my favorite sativas. Energizing, euphoric, phenomenal high, and so we felt like that was, we wanted to bring a little bit of fun back into cannabis. In the early days,
by the way,
a lot of fun.
Interrupt you for 1 second because the thought's going to escape me. But Maui Wowie, the original, had the most THCV naturally in that single cultivar. And what we did was we ended up breeding it out to breed more THC. So now that we're discovering, wait, THCV is an interesting cannabinoid. How do we get that back? Should have never bred it out of Maui. It's incredible.
Should have never bred out of Maui. Wow. It is an incredible cultivar. This is why I felt like it was the right thing to do. We had to name, and who doesn't want to go to Maui, by the way? What a beautiful place on planet Earth. And so just, bring some joy into the industry. I think, look, the industry got very serious here for a little bit. In the early days, it was a lot of fun. I remember, I think it was in 2015 or 2016, going on to CNN and saying, hey, we let our team use cannabis in brainstorming sessions. And it was like, whoa, this went global, right? This big story. Jimmy Kimmel's talking about Flowhub and how we let people use cannabis at work, in his monologue. And it ended up everywhere. It was on all the news channels. And for 2 weeks, this story dominated, this kind of global narrative around cannabis legalization and what Colorado was doing. I think a lot of that kind of went away after the fun of the industry kind of died down. It was very serious. The suits came in and we kind of lost some soul. And so Flowhub Maui, I felt like it was our duty to try to bring back a little bit of the good vibes back into the space. So Flowhub Maui is a lot of fun. Retailers are loving it. We're getting great feedback. And it's the platform that we're going to continue. The foundation will continue to build on as an organization for the next decade. So we're really excited about the platform. The team has just done such a phenomenal job, getting it out the door and getting it shipped. So really proud of the organization. And
well, congratulations. I mean, it's a big
yeah.
thing. And also, I think you just said, hey, starting from scratch, people are like, you're crazy doing that. But the investors don't seem to be like, you're crazy. You're able to raise capital in this insane market where it's very difficult to raise capital. I mean, I remember raising our first Series A in early 2019. It's way more difficult to raise our Series B in nowadays, but you've had some success. What's your secret? Just tell me. Nobody else is listening. Don't worry about it.
It's interesting, right? Like bridging, being your authentic self and bringing that into a business and telling a story. I mean, raising capital, selling, creating things, stories. It's all, it's funny, like I coming from entertainment, it's all storytelling, right? It's telling a compelling story, and stories are really important, right? It's how humans communicate. It's how we share information, and great stories are memorable, right? And they're shared audibly. We look at like Homer's Odyssey. That was originally an audible story that was communicated. There was never written down for a long time, right? That was a story that was communicated audibly and shared generation after generation, and it took on its life and morphed over that time. But you look at stories, and it's a really fundamental part of the human experience. And so I think, when you're out fundraising, you have to be able to tell a really compelling story. And it's not like it's a false story, right? So to be clear, right, you're not telling a false story, but you have to sell the future about where you're going. And that's where, and you have to be able to convince your team, you have to convince customers that that's where you're going. And ultimately you will go there, right? That's your job as a visionary leader, is to help drive the journey. And it's along the way, it's uncomfortable and it's a journey, and you come across really tough patches, and from the outside, everything looks super glossy, right? It's perfect, right? Oh my gosh, Flowhub is a perfect company. It's amazing. But really, companies are full of challenges, and it's a journey. And so you're telling these stories about where you're going, and that's, I think, what makes successful fundraising happen is you attract people to the story and to your narrative, and then you go and you have your team execute that narrative. And when you deliver those results, you can raise more money because you said you were going to go do those things, and now you did them, and now you're back to deliver them. You don't always get everything right? You stumble along the way, you make mistakes. That's like a normal thing, right? But you have to be focused on making sure you're staying the course and telling good stories. And so I think that's what makes successful fundraising successful. So look, I think at the end of the day, it's also, you got to remember, it's not about raising capital at the end of the day, right? That's just part of helping you achieve some ultimate vision, right? For us, it's making safe cannabis products accessible to every adult on planet Earth. We need capital to do that. We're on our way to do that, but we have to generate revenue. And so, there's the business side, right? And you have to put these two together, and that's part of the story, right? So, but look, capital isn't the most important thing. It's just important if you need it to get the next thing done. Right. You do need to build a stable company that can scale. And this is where, you could get lost in fundraising too much capital, right? Where you go down the path of getting too much money, and then you're like, oh, let's just spend it on all these things. And you end up—
That doesn't happen in the cannabis business. I never seen that with a company that raised all this money and spent them on Lamborghinis and helicopters and all that stuff.
Right. I mean, this industry is strife with craziness, but there's a way to do it reasonably, and I think it's really important to have a long lens. If you're an entrepreneur, or you're trying to start something, right, from nothing, right, you really want to know, why are you doing that? What's the reason behind it? And then where do you want to go with it ultimately? Is it just to make a lot of money? Because if that's your goal, you're going to fail, right? That's you can't just go I've learned this, right, as an entrepreneur. I didn't know that early on, but it's clear to me now that if you want to do great things, and you want to convince people to go along the ride with you, your employees, your investors, your spouse, your whoever, right? It's an adventure and it's a commitment. You've got to have a really long-term vision. So for us, again, we want to make safe cannabis products accessible to every adult on planet Earth. We'll probably never achieve that, but we're going to do our damnedest to try to get there, right? And so that is something that will hopefully live in our DNA for the next 150 years, whatever, right? I mean, as long as we're in business. But that type of longevity and long thinking, I think, is really important for entrepreneurs to have and to be successful in trying to build something.
Agreed. So how'd you reward yourself? It's very difficult to be a CEO in the cannabis space, especially, and to be the passionate CEO that you are, because you're also the, out front of the company. There's a lot of CEOs who sit behind their desks and they let somebody else, do the talking, but you're that CEO. How do you, after, a successful raise and, Jay-Z inviting you to the studio and letting you hit a couple of bars in his track, how do you reward yourself afterwards?
That's a really good question. Over the years, I like after a big fundraise, I'll typically rent a cabin for like a week and a half or so. No technology allowed, no Wi-Fi, and I will journal and read a lot of books and think about the next steps. And I've done that fairly consistently, and it's been pretty successful. I use psychedelics usually about once a year, and I will go on a journey to try to understand myself better and the company better and our society better and my family better, and try to like it's like I always say it's like 30 years of therapy in like 12 hours. And so that to me it's been fundamental in my growth personally, and I feel like it's somewhat of a reward. I think it's funny, like on the more kind of like day-to-day things, I've found a lot of joy in playing Xbox with my oldest daughter and my two little kids. So we have a 4, 6, and 8-year-old. Yeah. And my 8-year-old and I will play these puzzle games, and then we, our 4 and 6-year-old will watch and they'll participate, right? But they're not actually controlling. Sometimes they will, but we'll all play together and we spend time doing that. We'll go on hikes and spend time outdoors, which is fun. During the pandemic, we moved to Hawaii for a little over a year and spent time there as a family, homeschooling, and the company was remote, right? So I mean, it was kind of crazy. I was waking up at like very, very early in the morning. It was like 4 a.m. to 4 p.m. days. But from 4 p.m. on, I got so much time with the kids. So we'd go surfing, with the kids. We'd go scuba diving or whatever. It was just this amazing experience. Got really closer to my wife than ever, right? So just I try to spend time doing that. But I'll tell you, I'm like, I think I'm a little bit crazy in that I'm pretty obsessed with what I do. So there are days that like I will wake up so early, Len, and then I like don't go to bed till midnight. I just like do these crazy runs of just, my wife is so amazing, right? She's like the best friend ever to have. She's so supportive, right? She'll like take the kids and she kind of knows my process, but I get into this like super crazy mode for a while. Sometimes I like kind of like block out everything else and kind of get horse blinders on. So I try not to do that all the time so I don't burn out, but try to have that fun in between. So it's like, man, I'm still learning, like, right. I don't think I've like figured anything out really, but I'm trying to figure it out. So
yeah, you never do, man, but you follow your passion. I'm the same way, very similar kind of thing where I wake up, I just love what I do. And that drives the whole, and I think that sets an example for the entire company as well. If you're doing that, well, it motivates other people to follow along. So I know we're low on time and I need to get you back at some point, but I always ask my guests these questions. So I'll go through the list. Very difficult question, so just get ready. Please describe your first experience with cannabis.
Okay, high school. I was with a buddy in high school. I never tried cannabis. I was so curious about it, and yeah, I had my first joint that was higher than I could ever imagine. I vaguely remember it actually. I was like so high. But I think like a lot of people, like high school was my first time.
But it was a good experience. It wasn't a bad experience, right?
It was like okay. I didn't really, okay. Honestly, like in high, I wasn't really that into it, right? Like it wasn't like my thing, really. Like also like all that cannabis back in the day, it was just like so bad, right? Like you don't know what was sprayed on it. It was always like harvested way too early, so it was super racy. The terps weren't there. You didn't get the full, well-rounded, really nice, relaxing. Like it wasn't relaxing to me. It was just like, dude, this is like pretty. I remember being kind of psychedelic, actually, right? Like it was like this guy kind of like out of body experience, but like I wasn't actually that into it until I was in LA and I started to try, flower coming from Humboldt and outdoor, full spectrum. Like you get real terpy flower, and I thought that was like it would help me sleep, but like again, I wasn't even that into it then. It wasn't until I used it as a medicine, and the efficacy just like showed its full colors. I was like, oh my gosh, this is something that I'm in love with. I love cannabis. And I go through phases still. Like I'll take when we were in Hawaii, I didn't use cannabis a whole lot actually.
Right.
Like for whatever reason, I just was like, I was on a long extended tea break. I think I used it a handful of times there, but so that pattern I've noticed too. And I'll switch up edibles with flower with maybe some concentrate, some really nice solventless concentrate every now and again. Like I like it all.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. All right, so I'm a big music guy. So I have a couple music questions. Do you remember what the very first concert you ever attended was?
Like a big name concert?
Whatever comes to mind, even if it's not the very first one, it's the one that you remember.
Well, it's funny. My brother was a phenomenal violinist growing up. He had taken violin lessons since he was single digits, right? Like very young. He was phenomenally talented at music, and he'd write amazing music. We'd go to these like more classical concerts that he'd play in. I remember from like a very young age. So like those were I was exposed to like a lot of classical music early on, and that was like my first probably like actual concerts. But I remember going to like Dave Matthews Band and stuff when I think I was in high school probably, and those were like much bigger shows.
What was the last one that you attended, if you remember?
There's a Rufus show at Red Rocks, probably. Okay. Rufus Del Sol. I think, I want to say it's probably the last one. Maybe Big Gigantic, phenomenal artist.
But that was my next question. Is that if there's anything that you're listening to that's interesting that you want to share with people that you should check out?
Well, we have a Flowhub Maui playlist on Spotify, so there's some nice Hawaiian inspired. There's gonna be artists on there you've never heard, but are local to Kauai and the Hawaiian Islands, and you should take a listen to the Flowhub Maui playlist. But let me look at my phone, and I'll tell you. Let's see here. I've been very into country lately. I love Grateful Dead as well, like Dead & Co. and also some old Grateful Dead albums. But I've been really into country lately. I also have the top 100 songs in Zimbabwe, which I'm loving right now. Like there's just some real great vibes. This is Apple Music, by the way. So Goose is pretty great. I don't know if you've listened to Goose. I've been listening to a bit of Goose lately. Of course, Rufus is on here. Recent listens. So those are all my recent listens. But I've been loving country. I mean, I have a bunch. Ashley McBryde has a new album that came out. This experimental album called Lindaville, which is actually, there's some decent tracks on there. My wife's from Dallas, so we got some country swagger in the fam.
Got it.
I tried listening to the new Taylor Swift album. My daughter loves Taylor Swift, Midnights, but I have you listened to that one yet?
A little bit, yeah. My daughter played me a little bit of it. It's I have a hard time, and I have a hard time with country also. But here and there, some artists sound pretty good.
Billy Strings, you a Billy Strings fan?
I haven't listened to Billy Strings. I'm familiar. I mean, Chris Stapleton's last album was pretty good. I mean, that's as kind of as country as I get. I guess Willie Nelson and Johnny Cash and all that, but that's sort of crossover as well.
I like Kazi J. She's a local artist in Kauai, Hawaii. Kazijay. She's got some great tracks. Emily Brimlow. She's from Southern California. She's got this Jack Johnson kind of vibe. Yeah, those are some cool artists. I think they're both on the Flowhub Maui playlist. I'm like real eclectic. I love all sorts of music. I love electronic shows. I think electronic music has to be. My wife and we really bonded when we were dating over dubstep, and we had a lot of fun going to Lightning in a Bottle, and like great times.
Sure.
So.
All right. So, what has cannabis meant in your life?
Was it meant in my life? Wow. Well, you've got a lot of that. I feel like that from the show, right? It's opened my eyes. It's been a gateway drug for me in opening my eyes to a much deeper topic that is the war on drugs, right? So it's led me down some really interesting, through some interesting valleys and figuring out, the future that I want to live in. And I don't know. Yeah, cannabis has been really fundamental for me in many ways. I think it's a phenomenal medicine, and it's not for everybody, right? I think there's people who probably don't like it, but I don't know. It's been a really special plant to me.
It's clear. All right. Final question. Please describe what your room looked like growing up.
Full of computers. I was a hoarder of electronic machines. I was in a saltwater fish for a while. Like I thought that was super cool. So I had like a fish tank for some time with some like live coral and stuff. That was pretty cool. But no, I really like was so into computers, man. I built PCs. I had early Mac computers that I would program, and I loved computers growing up. And so I like if I showed you some pictures, you'd be like, wow, that's actually, you weren't exaggerating. You had a lot of computers. I literally had multiple monitors set up, and I'd have all my stuff. I mean, I had Linux, distros running, and
Yeah.
I mean, I was a little crazy with the computer
No,
stuff. But
no posters on the walls or anything like that. No, like Bill Gates
I had Bill Gates. I had, I don't remember having a lot of, maybe had some movie posters and stuff. I don't remember. I actually remember making a bunch of fake movie posters that I got printed at one point in high school. It was probably about high school.
Yeah.
Because I'd like all this photography gear and stuff. And I was like, I loved making these movie posters. And so I had like written some really, I think, terrible scripts, but like Private Caller was a script about, this private caller that kept calling someone, and there ended up being some murder. It was like this crazy, thriller. And so I made like a poster for that. So I would design posters. It's funny, like growing up, I never played video games. I spent some time in Thailand when I was 15. During my homeschool period, I loved kind of like these Asian cultures, and I spent so much time out there, and it was really fundamental actually to who I am now. So I'm in Japan and stuff, but in Thailand, I would buy, I guess I could say it now, but I would buy like illegal copies of Adobe products. I couldn't afford them back then, so I'd buy the street vendors would sell these bootleg, pretty expensive pieces of software. So I learned Photoshop, like the very early versions. And so I was like a design freak as well. So like that was something that I was super. So I do remember actually having a lot of pieces of art that I would like design on Photoshop and stuff. Cool. So it was like my own stuff. Yeah, I remember on Christmas lights. This is bringing back memories, man. Got me with this one. Holy cow!
That's great, man. That's what it's about. It's about having that conversation. I wish we could do this longer because I have so much stuff to talk to you about, but maybe we'll do a part 2 at some point when you raise your series.
Let's do it again. I'm down. Yeah, let's do it again, man. I appreciate you having me on. This was a really fun conversation. And you were a great interviewer, and like this was great, man.
No, I appreciate it. Where can people find out more about Flowhub? Where can they contact you? Social, website?
So I'm mainly a Twitter guy, I guess now with Elon Musk taking over the Twitterverse, we'll see what happens there if that stays. You can find me at Kyle Sherman on Twitter. You can go to flowhub.com, FLOWHUB.com, and you have social links you can follow. We have a lot of great, if you're trying to open up a store, we've got some great content. We call it our Learn Hub, and you can go in and learn how to open up a store. We've got free SOP templates and everything, you name it, like ideas on marketing. And so it's great resources there that we've compiled over many years. But yeah, this you can find us, social Flowhub and cool. At Kyle Sherman.
Hey man, thank you so much for being on. I really, really appreciate your time, and we'll definitely do this again.
Let's do it. Thanks for having me on, Len. I really appreciate it.
Got it.